in a moment, and it's happening over there, and if we're getting mics, we're getting stuff set up, so I'm killing time. That's what happens sometimes. Jason, are you ready at least? Come on, man. Come on. So I'm going to be inviting up on the stage a couple of my really good friends and project partners who work with Dax Dev in a number of projects. And they're going to be helping us and guiding us through the work that we did. So a little bit about the work that we did with Dax Dev. So we have some emerging areas of agreement for the future assessment and accountability that we're going to present with you. And just as a general by way of background, the way our work is a little bit different, obviously, than the work that the Westat and Insight have done. Our work is really driven around sort of a deeper, longer engagement with a group of people in a way in which we're building both community and using the community building strategy and techniques. Those are small group, large group, interactive data that folks are reacting to and responding to as a way to help kind of do some more co-generative dialogue. And that dialogue allows for us to pull up some mirrors, and using those mirrors, we give back to the group what we're seeing so that we can do another layer of deeper dive. So there's a lot of sifting that happened. And from a process standpoint for us, that meant that we engaged in four hour-long sessions with about 20 civil rights leaders of organizations and education equity practitioners, folks who are really sort of leading the conversations in a variety of different spaces across the country, working with a lot of different identity groups. So you can see our process overall was really to kind of get folks together and really do some grounding, and then to use that and to use each session as a building block to get to what we're presenting back to you today. So as I've already said, we're going to be inviting to the stage a couple of folks that are going to help guide us and lead us through this work. So first, I'm inviting Emily Martinez and then Jason Spector, and I'm going to move over stage left, and then they're going to get us going.
Thank you. It's good to be with you all today. And it's really exciting to be a part of this process, as we've heard from Insight, and then we were participants in the roundtables, facilitators of the roundtables this summer, to be able to be at this kind of event, which marks a culmination point. So I'm going to go over Jason and I are going to review the 4 areas of agreement. These are emerging areas, as we've said in the intros. This is an ongoing dialogue, and you're invited to be part of a live discussion that's a living process. So that's actually really exciting. And I also wanted to mention that these are all in the aspirational state. So as you've heard the words reimagine and rethinking education, this is part of where our roundtable sessions left us, is we wanted participants to be a part of that aspirational state. So these emerging areas of agreements came into 4 pillars that you'll see up here. And these are very strong and powerful statements. So I'm just going to read them out because I think it's really important that we are able to focus on them, and then we'll talk about them in more detail. So pillar 1 was our education system consistently implements broadened definitions of success. Pillar 2 is our education indicators and assessments, no matter the setting, are grounded in continuous improvement and accountability. Pillar 3, our systems of support are strengthened to enhance shared accountability that centers equity and promotes transparency and continuous targeted improvement. And pillar 4, historically marginalized communities, families, and youth have greater voice and ownership in assessment and accountability. Now, I know we're presenting today in a hybrid space with both virtual and in person here. And as we said, this is part of a multi-step process. So we're going to do something a little bit different it may feel a little bit different during our presentation, which is we're going to pause and give you moments to think. And again, that might feel a little bit different, but we know this is a lot of info, so we want to give you some reflection time. There's no need to respond. We just want to give you time to absorb what we're saying as we're reviewing it. So I'll go over pillar 1, our education system. And you see the S in parentheses there because we wanted to incorporate education system beyond just the classroom to multiple ways in which students are being educated and the multiple ways in which they experience education. Consistently implements broadened definitions of success. So I'm going to invite you to just think for a minute, take about 20 seconds. What comes to mind for you, or what manifests as you read this statement? Just go ahead and take a second to write that down. Just think about it on your own. And as we heard from our roundtable, what education, implementing broadened definitions of success looks like. And I actually wish we had that slide from the animated video because it was also in the animated video in a much more simpler equation format. But that looks like including measures beyond academics, It looks like creating supportive environments for students, not just in the classroom, but also in the school, community, and system-wide levels. It looks like success is contextualized and informed by culture and communities and families. And that really importantly, student engagement is a precondition of learning. Students have to be engaged in order to learn. And that student-centered learning plans are co-created along with families and educators with their individualized learning goals in mind. And we have a quote that highlights this on the next statement that says, "It's important to speak to the tension by acknowledging the consistent disparities in student performance on a narrow set of measures in the school setting, while stating that our children are demonstrating competence in settings where they feel they belong." That was from one of our roundtable participants. And as the quote highlights, what you can see here is that it does focus on that narrow set of measures. And in that aspirational state, it's important that those definitions of success are broadened beyond just those narrow academic measures to, as we also heard from Insight's presentation, competencies, attitudes, agencies, identities, and other behaviors. And also that this focus is shifted into making sure that the classroom and the systems that support the classroom are a supportive space in which students feel comfortable demonstrating that we know what they know and comfortable demonstrating a sense of belonging in that. And I will pass it to Jason to talk about Pillar 2.
Thanks, Emily. So moving to Pillar 2, our education indicators and assessments, no matter the setting, are grounded in continuous improvement and accountability. Again, we'd like to request that you take about 20 seconds here to think through how this manifests for you in your work, in your experiences. What does this statement mean for you? All right, so as we discussed in our roundtables, as we thought about student formative and summative assessments, it was important for us as we thought about the aspirational state that both are culturally relevant, aligned to state standards, and grounded in a model of continuous improvement, including with formative assessments that they guide day-to-day teaching and learning. We also thought about expanding our definition of assessment to include school quality measures and broadening those to encompass social-emotional learning, school climate, teacher capacity, working conditions, resources, and much more. All of this is in a model of continuous improvement, which is driven by timely disaggregated student data, which is granular enough and timely enough to provide individualized supports through evidence-based interventions. Additionally, as was discussed in the previous presentation, alignment is really critical. And so we're going to hear a quote here, or I'll speak out a quote here from a roundtable participant around that. So, we need standards for establishing the learning experiences that get to an integrated set of student outcomes. The connection between relationships, experiences, and competencies has to be explicit. So as we consider this last point in Pillar 2, it's really important to think through that assessments, curriculum, standards, preparation, ongoing training, accountability, and more are all aligned. The implication of this is that our K-12 systems, our out-of-school time, our higher education also need to be aligned. And this would have implications for our content, our standards, the way that we define success, measure success with our assessments, and ultimately how we hold and share responsibility for accountability throughout our levels of our education system. So moving forward to that point around accountability, we'll move to Pillar 3 here. So Pillar 3, our systems of support are strengthened to enhance shared accountability that centers equity and promotes transparency and continuous targeted improvement. And if you'll bear with me again, we'd like to request that you consider this statement. And what does this mean for you? How does this show up in your work and in your life experiences? So as we thought about accountability in our roundtable discussions, we were naming that accountability needs to be a shared responsibility held throughout levels of the education system and focus on the well-being and thriving of all children and youth. This is a shift, and we're going to talk about this more in a minute, from something punitive to multi-level support. And it needs to be held at not only the local level, but also at the federal and state level, with clear purposes for each, and infrastructure of support to guide each, and all geared towards more comprehensive outcomes, as we've referenced previously, that are determined and derived through diverse stakeholder involvement. With all of this being undergirded by school and community data, because we know that education occurs both inside the classroom and elsewhere in the community, and that these data are used to better understand root causes, to track over time and that are ultimately being employed for multi-level shared accountability. So to dig a little deeper into this, and put simply by one of our roundtable participants, we should use accountability to support and improve versus to punish and to shame. So what does this mean? It was important for our roundtable participants to name that and to acknowledge that there has been a real history here of accountability being punitive. As we think about school closures, as the previous presentation referenced, some of the negative cycles of harm that are perpetuated from accountability to communities, and to think about a shift and a reframe for accountability to be about multi-level support. Additionally, as we think about accountability, it's traditionally been rather top-down. It's been held more locally, and it's flowed from federal to state to local. And so we were thinking about accountability as having more of a bidirectionality or more of a reciprocity to it so that it can flow upward from community as well. All of it geared towards investment in identified student groups' success, as well as success of the broader education system with a lens of equity throughout. All right, I'm going to hand it back now for Pillar 4 for Emily to discuss.
And finally, our fourth pillar, historically marginalized communities, families, and youth have greater voice and ownership in assessment and accountability. And so for one more time, we want to invite you to reflect on this for a minute and just think about what it means to you. So for our roundtables, what we heard is that this looks like historically marginalized communities and stakeholders are engaged in the process as these systems are being created, refined, and implemented. So not just at the end when the process is complete, but in the creation of the process. And relatedly, that the design and implementation and execution of these processes incorporates their voice, and that includes the culture, that they're culturally relevant to those families and communities. And then that schools and districts make meaningful space and time for families to engage in accountability and resources rather than surface level. And then finally, and this was also an Insights presentation, that data is timely and used to engage, and that everyone in the cycle of that is aware of how that data is used. As we hear in this quote, simply put, parent or family engagement equals parents are partnered with and by schools to make a meaningful contribution to the way their child is educated and shaping a positive school environment. In essence, engagement calls for participatory, equitable partnership. And that's important, that participatory and equitable partnership looks like that investment of time and resources into that entire process. We know that it's not, maybe it takes more time than the ways that things have historically been done, but that it's important to allow for those meaningful contributions, and that it also opens up the space to be more equitable, and that those with the most resources aren't the ones who are having the most influence on the way that the process is completed as a whole. And so those are our 4 pillars, and I'll turn it to Dax to talk about this piece.
So an additional feature of our conversations and a recognition that we were, of course, brought together by the civil rights community, but this isn't only work that is that belongs to or should be carried out by the civil rights community. So what we tried to present here is ways in which people could be involved as actors in the system, disruptors of the status quo, if you will. And so obviously we know there's a history of legal interventions that are valuable and available. There's a way in which equitable oversight can be something that is not done to, but done with, and in a way that there's a component of training and capacity building that will allow for folks who maybe even in this room or who otherwise are practitioners are able to be engaged with schools in such a way that those principles are being shared. We've talked a lot about data, but I think that's for obviously very good reasons. But there's a recognition that there's a need to have tools for both the disaggregation and supporting community use of that data. So again, how we can play a role for intervention. Speaking to the work we're doing today, this idea of community and recognizing that folks who have the most to say often are not given the opportunity to say the most. And so what does that mean in terms of even us as experts and policymakers making space? Sometimes that's hard to do, but we have to make space for that to really happen. And then finally, there's a real clear opportunity to do communications work. So part of what's happening today, part of what this work is about, is on that front. So those are some things we wanted to offer that just were not necessarily a part of the world of the emerging agreements, but nevertheless felt grounded in sort of pushing towards this goal of a space and of working that establishes civil rights principles as we move forward. So I'm going to pass it back to Emily really quickly so we have a couple of next steps we want to address and then some questions.
Great. And so for next steps, again, this is part of you are today in part of the process in that we want to gather as a forthcoming is ways to gather reactions to these areas of agreement that we heard from Roundtable participants. And then we'll be regrouping and reflecting with selected experts and community leaders in order to synthesize the insights and feedback as well as what we heard from Insight into a preliminary report that sets forth those areas of agreement and also highlights where there needs to be further inquiry and points of tension. We know that this is such a broad discussion topic and these are very complex areas that we can't possibly get to them all, neither in this presentation, and we will make sure that that's captured in the report as well. And then we'll do some reconvening and tapping into an expanded network of education and civil rights activists and leaders so that there is a clear vision articulated for the future of assessment and accountability, and that's what Hal referenced in the beginning of today's sessions, to eventually develop an advocacy platform that builds upon this work to date. Jason?
So it's been said several times, and I'm going to say it one more time. There is work yet to be done, and there are many questions that are still outstanding. We actually have many more questions than are listed or could be listed on a single slide, but we want to leave you with at least a few to mull over. So we created 4 questions here that one corresponds to each pillar. So we just want to offer these into the space. So number 1, how can we ensure a commitment over time to allow for broader definitions of teaching, learning, education, and success to be fully utilized, implemented, and evaluated for their efficacy? Second, what are the implications of an increased focus on continuous improvement in assessment for school accountability, specifically through state standardized assessments? Third, how can we reframe accountability to shift mindsets and motivate positive behaviors, systems, and culture change? And fourth, how do we ensure equity in lifting up voices across communities and families in true and deep partnership? So we'd welcome discussion on these. We'll be here all day today. We'd also welcome discussion offline in the days and months to come. But for now, we'd also love to hear any questions from you all and to open up the space.
And one thing to bear in mind as you're thinking about questions, we're going to try our best to respond based on what came up for us in the groups, because again, similar to what Westat already articulated, our job here is to sort of lift up and present back. So we're trying to do as little interpretation beyond what we observed and what we've already done some synthesis around.
Hi, I just have a really simple question, which is when you're talking about accountability, at what level of the system are you talking about? Are you talking about federal, state, district, school, classroom?
Yeah.
All of the above?
All of the above. Yes, and this is something that we were discussing in great detail, that currently a lot of the accountability tends to rest at the local level and is felt most intimately within classrooms and within schools. And so we're looking to see, are there ways that that accountability can and should be held at different levels, and to what end? So if it is held at a state level, where is the state most equipped to create positive behavior change? Same for the federal level, and same for the local level as well. So I don't know that we've fully articulated the answer to that, but that was the type of discussion that we were engaged in.
Paulo DiMaria from the National Association of State Boards of Education, and also a former state superintendent in the state of Ohio. One of the questions I have really is, in this discussion about assessments and accountability, lately in my own language, I've been adding improvement as a third component, because I'm increasingly convinced that a lot of the work we do is predicated on, oh, somehow we know what better looks like. And the fact of the matter is, we don't always know what better looks like. And I tip my hat to Education Trust and the work of Karen Chenoweth on districts that succeed and schools that succeed, that making a school great is really hard work. And that itself also deserves attention to coalesce our thinking around what does a great school look like and how do we actually get there, driven by the assessment and accountability. Did that come up in your expert discussions very much? And if so, how does that influence your recommendations?
Either one. I mean, I think just as a baseline, I think one of the things that was indicated in a lot of the presentation was the word improvement came up as a recurring term. And I want to sort of hat tip to the folks that were in the room that maybe actually come from spaces that are other than the K-12 spaces, because I think there's more familiarity and even more sort of experience speaking the language of improvement. I think the challenge is trying to get that adopted into more formal education systems and really recognize and appreciate it as a valid means by which to hold accountability, so that isn't sort of zero sum, sort of, that's not zero sum. So I think there's an adoption challenge around that, but it's not necessarily a lack of awareness that people have around its value and utility. And I think that's why it's showing up so present in our aspirational state. But again, I'll add anything else that you all might want to add to that.
You said it well.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Tomlin Pressfield. I'm with the National Urban League. Just a quick question around your kind of aspirational state around testing and community involvement. When it comes to like culturally competent instruction and even like assessments and integrating that in kind of how student success is measured, do you all have like a take or a framework on what that looks like from like a subject standpoint? Like, what does culturally competent mathematics or like reading comprehension look like when we talk about assessments?
I would say that was pretty early. Like, we know that was in the further areas of inquiry, that needs to be developed because it was explored as this is important and it needs to happen. But the specifics of how is this implemented and what exactly would it look like across subject areas is something that we still need to have conversation about and continue to develop.
Yeah. I would add too that it was also part of our discussion as to how to make that part of higher education and educator preparation, so that it's not simply once teachers are already in schools, but even before they become teachers.
Along those lines, I think it responds to the question around where does accountability operate at different systems levels. Maybe the states are more equipped to hold accountability around competency, the cultural competency development of educators, because there are state institutions and higher education institutions which might be better situated to do that. Only thing I would add to that, I think we also talked about that's where the value of in really having folks, parents, community members, other folks involved in the design process, because there's an assumption that we can't bring that kind of expertise into the room. But I think that's what we were hearing from the group was, obviously it happens, there's a way for it should happen at the state level as a way to sort of make sure that there's a mass production of education for educators. But at the more school-based level, there's an opportunity to really do some nuanced work and bringing in people to help do some co-design and co-generation there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Hello, my name is Maritza Gertie from the National Parents Union, and I've heard a lot about language, and that is something that I always question. This is great. Our involvement in it has been great, but I always have to question language access for those that do not speak English. What will be your goal for that? Because none of this can happen if you do not make sure that an entire demographic of non-English speakers are also included in the process, the understanding, and also the language, especially with the assessments. There are so many families and guardians that do not understand these assessments because it is not in a language they can understand. So if you can clarify that for me, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think it really ties to the fourth pillar, which that translates to language can be a way that in which people are marginalized and that access to. So I think, and that's what we were talking about when we said meaningful time and allotment of resources to that, because that does take an investment of resources and time. It takes maybe some one-on-one conversations. It takes a lot of specifics in order to get to that understanding. So building in those kinds of resources that are needed to support populations where English is not the first language is really important.
We are at time.
Yep, that's it.
So this is weird. I'm thanking myself. Thanking the group. I don't know what to do here. Thank y'all.